So does this put an extra burden on managers if you're in a hybrid workplace? It's like you got dual personalities. When everyone's working remotely, I've got to be really, I think about clarity and making sure everyone understands. And then
Yeah,
when we're all in the office, I need to almost think about like office hours, right? I need to have an open door and be okay with someone just popping their head in and say, hey, you got a minute?
I think that classic, and extroverted and introverted may not be the right way to classify it, but the traditional leader that led by personality, let's call it that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of them were very unsettled by remote work because all of the tools that you had that you could whip out all the time where you popped in and, raised a little morale and got people together and got things going, and you got your energy from having people around you and seeing them doing things. I think they really struggled, and I would be willing to bet, although I have no data to support this, but what the heck, I would be willing to bet that some of those folks brought people back to the office and said it was critical that they do so for business reasons just because they were uncomfortable in a different kind of a setting. So they weren't thinking, what's best for my organization, what makes people most productive, what helps us get the most stuff done. They just didn't feel comfortable not having people around so that they could see and touch and manage. And so, if you're a leader, what your real job is to get things done, not to feel good about how those things get done necessarily.
Yeah. So, and it's complicated, right? This whole thing is complicated. On the flip side of that, I had a leader, and maybe it's about driving clarity and making sure you really focus on that. And he had an all remote team, and they ran a region. This leader works for a large retailer, and all these other leaders run regions. And he said, we're all working virtually. I think we're all working pretty hard. Some of these people are people I hired during the pandemic, so we never really worked alongside each other. He said, we finally kind of built out our command center outside of one of the stores where the team could come in. He said, once everybody was in there, he said, it kind of opened my eyes. I had more visibility into who was working and who wasn't. Like right. you got Jose over here, and he's just on the phone all the time. And then Susan's over there drinking coffee, watching him. It's like, so he said, virtually it's harder to see that unless you really focus on that level of clarity and really make that a priority. Excellent. So there was a third topic that is both a pain point in my world and a pain point in your world, and I'm sure a pain point in many other people's worlds, and that is the dreaded word, meetings. So my friend, what do you think about this?
That is not really a pain point for me.
Yeah. Well, you have effectively removed those from most of your daily life.
I have effectively escaped. What is it? Another Mark Cuban reference. What is it? He says the only reason he'll attend a meeting is if somebody's writing him a check. Basically, if they're buying something or they're investing or whatever else, and otherwise it's email.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because when I think of meetings, I immediately think of like that show VH1 pop-up videos. And I think of when I'm in a meeting, I'm kind of weird. I immediately think of a pop-up that appears above everyone's head, and their hourly rate is on that pop-up. And as soon as the meeting starts, the meter begins running. And if people started viewing meetings that way, I had a leader that got really upset because they were trying to cut costs, and this group had come in, and someone went out and bought like a really bougie luxury cupcake for someone who is having a birthday that day. It's like a $10 cupcake. They all celebrated the birthday. Well, she had a 2-hour meeting to talk about how that was too expensive and they shouldn't be wasting money on the cupcake. That cupcake became real expensive, my friend, after that 2-hour meeting. That quickly went from $10 to about $500 cupcake real fast. So
I always tell, especially business owners, I say, next time you're in a meeting with your folks, add up what the effective hourly rate is of every person in the room and decide whether you like writing the check for that, because it's your company. Do you like writing that check? If you've got 10 people in the room and they average even say $20 an hour, it's an expensive meeting. And did you get that out of that? So if you take that farther, there was a meta-analysis of like a decade of different studies that showed that 90% of employees feel that meetings are costly and unproductive, and the actual data bore that out. So when meetings were reduced by 40% in a whole bunch of different organizations, employee productivity increased by over 70%. So basically, I mean, part of the reason is because if you're not in meetings, you have more time to get stuff done, obviously.
Right.
So if I'm not in 4 hours worth of meetings, hopefully I'm using that 4 hours for something productive. But there's other stuff behind meetings that makes me hate them. One of them is one study found that when employees go to a meeting, the average IQ of each individual drops by 15 to 20%.
Wow.
That's especially true if you feel like you're a junior member of the group. So if there's a hierarchy to it and, you know, you, Brandon, you're the boss, and then there are people different levels, the people at the lowest level especially, their IQ drops. And I think that has more to do with confidence than anything else. If you already feel kind of insecure, confidence matters. Let's just put it that way. And so those people don't feel as good about themselves. And then if a person feels, whether overtly or implicitly, criticized, their IQ drops even further. So right away, by having 6 people get together, they're not as smart. Some of them may be even less smart. And if they feel like they had an idea that other people poo-pooed, they're even less smart. So now not only are you paying the rate that you referred to, but you're also getting less from it because you're not getting the best out of your people. And then there's one more I thought I'll throw in there. If a meeting doesn't start on time, they tend to be a third less effective in terms of actual outcomes than meetings that start on time. Part of it's because it's the whole drift to a start thing, but also part of it is you lose your momentum, you lose your oomph. There's this implicit, well, okay, if Brandon's late to the meeting, does this really matter? You know, why was it important that we sit here? Brandon's time must be more important than ours if he can't be on time. You know, sorry to pick on you, but what the heck. So there's all kinds of reasons to not have meetings. And that's especially true when you're trying to generate ideas, come up with solutions. If you're trying to brainstorm, the conventional wisdom says, yeah, get a group of people together and let's brainstorm and we're going to feed off each other and get all these great ideas and everything else. Doesn't happen. The better way to do that is send an email, say, here's our problem. Here's what we're trying to solve. Don't lead it. Don't say, here's 3 things. What do you think about each one of them? Just say, what do you think we should, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that because there's another study I'm going to cite. What do you think we could do? That's an important distinction. There was another study that showed that if you say to people, what do you think we should do? You tend to get less ideas, less creative ideas, and less optimal outcomes than if you say could. Because should tends to be narrowing. Should is like, what should we do? And it usually comes down to this or this. Could is like, all right, we have this problem. What can we do?
I like that distinction. Could is more like possibilities.
Yeah,
should has almost like a moral judgment on it. Like what's the right and proper thing we should do with our money? Yeah.
That was exactly the focus of the study, was that on moral or ethical questions, it was especially narrowing and limiting because it came down to pretty much an either or. Yeah. Should we do this or should we do that? But if you have this situation, you say, what could we do? Now it opens it up. So send your people an email and say, here's a situation. What do you think we could do? Gather up the ideas. You'll get better ideas that way. Pick out the ones that you think are pretty good. If you have to, get a really small group together and say, let's work through these, or send it back out and say, here's our top ones. What do you think about that? But the idea that you're going to get better ideas and better solutions by getting a big group together, every bit of research shows that that is not the case. And people will give you much better input and feedback. And the people that felt like they're junior, they'll throw their ideas out there because it's a whole lot easier on an email back to you to say, here's 3 ideas, than it is to float your crazy idea in front of 20 people, all of whom you think are more important than you, or that are higher on the food chain, or that are more likely to criticize your idea.